Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 86 of the Eat for Endurance podcast. My name is Claire Schornstein, and I'm a board-certified sports dietitian and runner based in Santa Cruz, California. Today, I am so excited to welcome fellow sports dietitian Dana Eshelman, who is joining me to chat all about cortisol, otherwise known as the stress hormone, and how it relates to health and athletic performance. Dana and I were brainstorming topics and landed on this one as we both frequently see athletes, and especially recreational athletes, burning the candle at both ends with training, work, family, and other aspects of their busy lives. They're almost always underfueling, whether intentionally or not. They're dealing with all kinds of different forms of stress, and they're not sleeping enough. I've said this more than once on this podcast, that stress management is something I personally am always working on, as well as just holding boundaries with work. Just as a small business owner, and mother of two young kids, it's often hard. So I know this was a topic that I could relate to for sure, and I really hope that you find it helpful. Before we dive in, today's show is brought to you by my self-paced course, Peak Performance for Endurance Athletes. You guys have heard me talk about it. It's a 7-part series packed with evidence-based, easy to understand information with tons of visuals covering everyday nutrition, hydration, intra-workout fueling, training the gut, performance and micronutrient supplementation, and preparing for race day. Grab the link to my course in the show notes or on my website, eatforendurance.com. All right, so let's chat all about cortisol with fellow sports dietitian Dana Eshelman. Dana, welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. How's your day going so far?
It's going great. It is cold here in Colorado, but it's good. How's yours?
Good. What part of Colorado are you from?
I'm like just outside of Boulder in a town called Erie.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'd love to get to know you a bit better and, have my listeners get to know you better as well as a dietitian and as an athlete. I believe you're a triathlete. You've been racing at kind of a high level, and I'd just love to hear a bit about your background.
Yeah, so I always say I'm a runner turned triathlete. I kind of was on the chronic injury cycle, just running, and so started to dial in things with both biking and swimming, and then one of my best friends convinced me one year to do a triathlon, and I was like, sure, I'll try it. It was super fun, and that was I think in 2017, and so obviously COVID and stuff, didn't race then, but have been racing since then, and just really love it. And seeing what you can accomplish in 3 different sports is pretty cool. So yeah.
Love it. And what about as a dietitian? Tell me a little bit about your background there.
Yeah, so I think like most dietitians, I started in clinical and started in like a long-term care type setting. Always knew I wanted to get into endurance sports, but didn't honestly know the avenue to get there. So honestly just started talking to other dietitians that were doing what I wanted to do, and asked them how they started, and started A Dash of Dana, which is my business, about almost 4 years ago now, which is pretty crazy to think about. And that's where I work predominantly with endurance athletes. I have a couple more strength power type athletes, but mostly endurance athletes, and just really understanding how to support their body, not only in sport, but also like day-to-day life, and developing an understanding for what it means, to be an athlete. So
Awesome. And yeah, I'm really excited about our topic today. It's, cortisol and how it impacts health and performance mostly in endurance athletes, but cortisol is obviously something we want to think about for everybody. And usually I ask my guests to set the stage, but I decided I'm going to set the stage today and just give some detailed background on cortisol. And then Dana, you can kind of help me dig into the meat or tofu or whatever protein you want to pick of our topic. Sound like a good plan?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. So cortisol is known as the stress hormone. And of course, you know all this. So this is for my listeners' benefit. It plays a key role in the body's sympathetic or fight or flight response. Cortisol is the active form of the hormone. Cortisone, you may have heard of, is the inactive form. And essentially, whenever the brain receives a stress signal, and whether this is a true threat, a perceived threat, or something physiological, even like low blood sugar, and we're going to get into all that stuff, of course, the hypothalamus in the brain releases a hormone which triggers the pituitary gland to release another hormone, and that causes the adrenal glands, that's what everyone's really familiar with, to release cortisol, as well as several other things, including aldosterone, which regulates blood pressure, and catecholamines like dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are all neurotransmitters, which regulate the central nervous system functions, and androgens, which are, of course, sex hormones. And so once cortisol is produced, it then inhibits this whole cascade from continuing via a negative feedback loop. And this whole cascade is known as the HPA axis, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, that's a mouthful, axis. So I feel like everyone's kind of heard the HPA axis thrown around, but I really wanted to describe in detail like what it actually was so people understand what we're all talking about, right? Because I don't know about you, but I see on social media everyone's like the HPA, they throw around the HPA axis, the HPA axis, and everyone's like, what the hell is that? So that is, listeners, that is what that is. If you're ever wondering what the hell are these dietitians talking about, it is very important. And the reason why I'm excited about this topic is because, and I don't know about you, Dana, but cortisol is often so vilified, and it's like, oh, it's this bad thing. And it certainly can be if it's completely out of whack, and we're going to talk about that, right? Negative things will definitely happen if it's out of whack, but it's also important to note that not all forms of stress are bad, right? We know that. And our body, when it's functioning normally, can absolutely handle stress and return to homeostasis. And cortisol itself plays a lot of really important roles in the body. So, for instance, cortisol specifically is a glucocorticosteroid hormone, meaning one of its main roles it plays is in like the breakdown and formation of glycogen, or in other words, blood sugar regulation. So hello, that's very important with endurance athletes, obviously, or with anyone really. And when we're in fight or flight mode, you know, we have to free up energy for strenuous exercise. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And the other thing is, outside of the stress response, we know that cortisol is super important just in like waking us up, right? So it follows a very specific pattern across the day when everything's working well, and you know, you wake up, there's this sharp rise in cortisol within 30 minutes. That's called the cortisol awakening response, or CAR as it's known. And it literally is just to wake you up and get you moving and regulate your blood sugars, and that's all normal and good, right? And then it kind of peaks and then it gradually decreases throughout the day. That's the pattern that we want to see. And often though, and I'm sure you see this as well, like we aren't seeing those patterns, like maybe it's going too high or it's not going high at all or whatever it is. And the common causes of that usually are stress, lifestyle behaviors like nutrition, sleep, etc., infection, inflammation. So again, we're going to get into all these things, but I just want to kind of help the audience understand what's going on in the background. And a couple more points I want to make. You know, most people immediately think of stress when it comes to cortisol, but cortisol really affects lots of different things like thyroid and gut and immune system and metabolic health, and of course our sleep patterns. So we are a human being with lots of things going on and everything's connected. So I want to throw that out there. And the very last thing I want to say is that everyone always assumes that it's like high cortisol we're talking about, but we want to avoid being too low or too high. So we might be really high due to acute forms of stress, inflammation, or infection, or blood sugar imbalances, and that's of course a really big one. And as it ties into underfueling, caffeine, hyperthyroidism, and poor sleep hygiene. And then cortisol could be low due to a number of things like more chronic forms of stress, inflammation, infection, poor sleep, and both certain medications, etc. All right, I just threw a lot of information out there, but I wanted to just like completely set the stage. Did I miss anything? I may have missed something. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I thought that was a beautiful overview of what cortisol kind of does in the body. And I love that you intertwined, like, as humans, we are a very complex, interconnected network of systems, and we can't just singly isolate cortisol on its own. It affects so many other things in the system, and especially, right, being a hormone. So yeah, so I think it's going to be great to dive into these further.
Yeah, so now you're going to help me like peel back the layers, all right? So we set the stage. Hopefully everyone has a general sense if you weren't already aware of the things cortisol does. And of course I didn't name every single thing, but those are the big ones. So let's explore these, other parts of this topic and especially connecting it to endurance sports. So I want to start with stress because that's the big one for most people, right? And
Yes.
it can take so many different forms. It can be acute or chronic. It can come from places like, it can be more of a mental form of stress, like life stress, whatever. It can be physical, like exercise or sauna use, even, whatever. It can be chemical if we're talking like pollution or alcohol or drugs or smoking. From my own experience, I'd say what I see like in active people, it's usually a combination of many different forms of acute and chronic stressors, like all thrown together, and predominantly in the mental and physical category. And some of us are doing a better job than others at managing it. So,
100%.
so let's start with exercise. If exercise is a form of stress in the body, how does endurance activity affect our cortisol levels? Is this something we should be concerned about? What do you think?
Yeah, so naturally when we're exercising, yes, cortisol is going to rise, right? Just as you mentioned, it's like the glucosteroid, and it helps our body break down muscle glycogen to use for energy. So yes, it's going to increase in the body. Really long, intense activity when we're underfueled and or not supporting that session cause an increased and a prolonged increased risk of stress, especially if we're doing this like day after day, month after month, and it's just like this chronic cycle. Absolutely. So what I always remind my athletes is, how are we supporting not only that singular session, but your body all day long, the rest of the day, to help support that training volume that you might be in, and also tomorrow's work that you're going to be taking on. So that's a really great way to like combat that stress response that happens with training.
Yeah, the way I would say like we shouldn't be worried about it, but with a huge asterisk at the end. It's because it's like so
Totally.
many people, because again, like the body can handle stress when it's an appropriate amount, and when you're coupling that with that time to rest and digest, right? Or just recover and everything. But so many people don't, because they're just running around and getting, inserting their training with like work and family and all the other things going on in their lives. And as you said, day after day after day. And then suddenly it's just all building up, and that's not a good place. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
What about mental stress? Whether, that's anxiety or life stress or whatever else. We're obviously not therapists, but stress management's a big piece of the health and performance puzzle. And it's something that comes up a lot, I'm sure, in your coaching work as well. So I'm curious what you're kind of seeing in this category and how you're working with athletes to manage this form of stress, or anything else you want to talk about here.
Yeah. I mean, mental stress, I think, can impact us to a greater degree than like the endurance stress, because it's like overbearing a lot of the time. This is actually where I always encourage athletes, if I feel that it's out of my scope, to definitely get a therapist tied in, making sure that they're appropriately dealing with that, because same thing, like if we're underfueling our system, it's that day after day after day, like one day of high stress, like you said, our bodies can handle it. It kind of recalibrates and figures things out. But when it's this constant battle, and we're burning the candle at both ends, and we're like trying to fit all the things in, which is what I see with endurance athletes a lot. And that can be mentally draining. A couple things that I see are, we're shortening our sleep span in bed. That is going to immediately raise our cortisol. So we're not recovering properly. Our glycogen stores are now going to be depleted. We're trying to fit in our training sessions, and then trying to take care sometimes of family, work, whatever the case may be here. And we're doing all of these things, and it's just becoming overwhelming. A big recommendation I always have for athletes is setting a priorities list for yourself. and making sure that you're being really realistic with that. I typically say pick 4 things in a day, keep those 4 things up in your kind of priorities list, and then if you have extras outside of that and you get to them, give yourself a gold star, right? Like that's a great way to think of it.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to be like, I need to get these 10 things done today, and I'm trying also to go train for an hour plus, and it's not realistic, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I know it's something when it comes to like burnout and all of that, and I was mentioning this to you offline, like
mm-hmm.
I certainly like stress management. I've talked about this before in this show. Like it's something I'm constantly dealing with myself,
Mm-hmm.
and how to like balance all the things. And I mean, balance truly doesn't exist. I mean, that's just how I feel about it. Like you just don't. You're just,
Mm-hmm.
as you said, you're prioritizing one thing over another, and you're just kind of switching those things around at different points in time. But I think it's very much paying attention to like rather than waiting till you reach like a mental crisis point, which a mental health crisis point where you're just like completely having a meltdown, which like, I have definitely hit that point several times. Rather than waiting till that point, like start to notice when you're like, oh wow, like I am not feeling so hot right now and I need to make some changes. And some things are like more realistic than others. And I always talk about this with clients, like, maybe achieving, 8 hours of sleep, like uninterrupted sleep is just not going to happen right now, this season of your life. Okay, you're doing your best, right? So it's really like, I love the idea, as you said, of like picking these, like a small number of goals, targets, priorities, however you want to call them, and really like honing in on those things and then noticing how you feel as well. So I guess for you, like when you say 4 priorities, are those like tasks, like to-dos? Are there things to take care of yourself? Like what's going into that bucket?
Yeah, so those are going to be 4 like tasks that
Okay.
I encourage anybody that I work with that self-care is like a non-negotiable. So the tasks are like this external list from the non-negotiables in a day. Like
Got it.
we sleep, we eat, we practice self-care, and I typically say anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes a day. It doesn't have to be this like hour-long spa day, It's like
Mm-hmm.
something simple. It could literally, I have some of my, especially my busy moms, I see this a lot with, is like waking up 5 to 10 minutes just to have like some peace in the morning before kids get up and the day starts and you hit the ground running. Like very simple. So or before they go to bed. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I was
outside
gonna
of
say
that.
for that one that it's unfortunate. I mean, it depends on your kid, but I know for my kids,
Sure.
and I feel like I've watched like funny reels on this, but it's like you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna wake up at 5:30 so I can peacefully enjoy some time to myself, and it's like that's the day that the kids get up at 5:25 or whatever. So yeah, I mean, but I think having some flexibility with it and really just, as you said, maybe it's before they go to bed, maybe it's after drop off, like whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
just carving out some time. And I did that for myself today. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start putting down some like hard rules for myself because
Mm-hmm.
I've slid back into this like point of just not taking care of myself in those tiny little ways, and I could feel the effects. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, so I think when it comes to this mental stress, it's not something you need to do alone, or, like maybe, and maybe whether or not you include a therapist, like obviously everyone's needs are different, but you can lean on other support systems in your life, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
family, friends, whatever, partner. And it can take just so many different forms,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's just something to explore for sure. I want to actually go backwards a bit, unless you have anything else to add to the mental health piece, but maybe with exercise, I think just mentioning, because like just talking about overtraining a little bit and just
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
balancing that. And I don't know if you want to talk about anything you've seen or what you typically talk to with your athletes. But just again, some of these other like we're going to talk about underfueling separately, but talk a little bit more about just how exercise, and especially in endurance athletes, how this can impact. And I know we're focusing on cortisol, but it's also just the greater picture of our health and performance, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if there's, I feel like we can dig into that one a little bit more. We kind of rushed through that a little bit, I realize.
Yeah. I see overtraining a lot in endurance athletes because I think there's this like, I call it an old mentality of just like more, more, more. Like, let's just like add, I have, 30 extra minutes in my day. I'm going to go out for a quick run. And it's like, there's no reason for that. And I always remind athletes like rest is also productive. I definitely used to be one of those athletes that would just like tack on more training to my already pretty packed schedule of training, and like thinking I would gain an extra, inch, right, of just adding more volume. And this leaves us really more susceptible to injury, which will sideline you, right? It leaves us more susceptible to getting sick. It definitely can actually plateau or decrease performance. When we, like I said, rest is productive, but when we have a set training plan and we're just adding more volume to that, our body isn't fully recovering. And when we're recovering, that's when we're reaping all of those training adaptations that we've worked really hard for. And this includes increased glycogen storage and improved like that metabolic flexibility, and how literally how your body uses stored nutrients, right? That's when that happens, is recovery time. And if we're not doing that, then we're really not seeing what our full potential is as an athlete. And so big picture here is all of these things, for lack of a better word, are happening because your body's stressed out. And that's not, it's just not going to do what you're asking it to do. And what I've seen with athletes is like, they can, maybe for a moment in time, they can take this all on. They can take on more and more and more until they can't. And it's a pretty hard stop. It's like this, like, they'll be reporting to me like, I feel exhausted. I can't hit my paces. I can't hit my power. I like, what I actually see a lot of is I don't have an appetite anymore. And they're not an appetite for food. Yes, one, but also an appetite for like getting out there and like doing their best in sport, where they just have no motivation. They, their body's like tapped completely. So those are really common things that I see.
Yeah, no, thanks for adding that. And the other thing I'd add to our conversation is not forgetting about all of the non-training physical activity, that you may do, whether it's walking the dog several times a day or bike commuting or run, to work, or, whatever it is that you do. Maybe your job is incredibly physical and you're on your feet for many, many hours. We kind of forget that counts. And it's hard, it's really the way I'm talking about it, I'm trying to kind of separate it out, but it's really hard to separate out, say, like exercise and mental stress, when really, like, it's so, all of this is so closely tied to fueling, like an exercise in particular, like talking about the fatigue and the low appetite, all these things, like, that's because in most cases, no one is supporting the work that they're doing with enough food or enough consistent food, right? Like, that's always what's going together. So yes, there's overtraining, but the flip side of that coin is underfueling. So, we always have to remember, like, or look at the entire picture of, exercise, energy expenditure, and other forms of physical stress. And like I mentioned, sauna use, like that, yeah, that's great if, for some athletes in a certain, at a certain amount per week, and also depending on how much you're training, but it's easy to overdo for some people. So, it's just kind of keeping these things in mind, always looking at context, right? When thinking about these things. And the other thing I want to mention before we move into underfueling specifically is, the whole concept of timing, like how cortisol is released and how it's cleared. And I don't know if this is something that you talk about ever with clients, but cortisol is released 10 minutes after a stressful event, and it's made and then released into to circulation, and then it's cleared about 1 to 2 hours later. And so if you're constantly having, whether little or big, perceived or real stressful events, whatever you want to call these, and remember that stress takes like a million different forms, whether it's exercise or mental or low blood sugar or whatever it may be, like you're basically triggering this release constantly, and it's not cleared right away. It can take some time. So there's potentially a chance that like cortisol is accumulating in your bloodstream for many, many hours, which also isn't great. So yeah, we have to take that into account, and that's where kind of that whole stress management and figuring out like, can I just chill for a little bit and check in with my body? And I mean, there are lots of things we can talk about here, but it's something to consider, because I don't know about you, but like I think about my day, and I know like my athletes' days, and some of these days are kind of crazy with like the number of things. Like training is fun and great, but again, it's a form of stress. And then you maybe jump into your work day and you're stressed out because something happens at work, and then like your kid or something happens personally, they're just like, it's constant, it's unrelenting. So I don't know, it's just something I thought would be interesting to think about or throw out there. But yeah, do you have anything else to add on that before we move on?
No, I think that was great.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about, underfueling. And, as I mentioned, one of these physical stressors is low blood sugar levels, and that really ties into underfueling or not feeling consistently. Like maybe you're going a long period of time without eating, whether that's intentional or not. So what do you want the audience to know about when it comes to underfueling, just in the context of this discussion?
Yeah, I think especially with endurance athletes, underfueling can be intentional and unintentional.
Yeah.
If we are in a peak phase or high volume phase of training, it can be difficult to eat your basic nutrition needs. And so sometimes we have to get a little creative with things, making sure, maybe it's adding a really nutrient dense, packed protein fruit smoothie with like some healthy fats in there, and so we're getting that nutrition in, and drinking calories versus having to eat all of them. Underfueling is, I think it's probably the biggest thing that I see. I think most of us dietitians that work with endurance athletes, I talk about it every day, absolutely, multiple times a day, and it comes in all forms. Like I said, is like that intentional where, athletes maybe heard some interesting nutrition fad out there and are trying to, we'll just say fasting or something, and they're just like not going into their workout fueled. And then, this is a stress response because now the body's having to make increase your blood sugar without food in your system. So we're breaking down muscle glycogen, liver glycogen to support your effort that you're going out and doing. And that's a perceived stress on the body. And then maybe they get home from their session, and kiddos have to get off to school. They're not eating, and now it's noon, and they haven't eaten all morning. They've gone out on an hour run, and the body's like, as I call it, running on fumes at this point. They're just like completely, again, tapping that system. And this can obviously become a big concern over time. And honestly, even in one day, that's a lot on the system. And so we want to think about, one, having more or less like a consistent fueling plan, especially if you're in a high volume phase. I recommend my athletes typically eating anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, and not going longer than that. And for individuals that really struggle with hunger cues, maybe initially when we've started together, if you're used to eating in the morning and then you don't eat till night, those hunger cues definitely can be suppressed, just as almost like a coping, what's the word I'm looking for? Not coping.
Mechanism.
Yeah, like just basically your body's slowed down those hunger cues, and just as a way to get through the day. And so we have to basically train the body to reignite those and start to release those as they should, essentially, right? Because like we talked about earlier when Claire, you were setting the stage, is like cortisol is essentially like this mother hen. It acts on our whole system, and causes this cascade of hormonal changes when it's high. And one of these is suppressing your hunger cues, right? And so that's kind of what's happening if you're going long periods of time without eating. And over time, this just becomes a norm. And you just are like, I'm not hungry. But behind the scenes, your body's like, hey, feed me. I need something here. Support me.
Yeah.
So I just tell athletes, like, set a timer on your phone. If you have I do this for myself too. It's like, if I have a really packed day, I try not to schedule things more than 4 hours at a time. But life happens sometimes, and that's normal. So then I'm planning ahead. It's like, maybe I have some desk snacks on my desk, or I have a protein smoothie that I'm just sipping on throughout the morning. And that's, we can find ways to make it work and decrease that underfueling.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reminded of, this has happened to me many times where like someone isn't eating in the morning, and like I'm never hungry. And then their first complaint when they start eating is, but now I'm hungry all day. And I'm like, yes, exactly. That's a good thing. They're like, but no,
Yes.
It's not. That I just want to eat all day. And I'm like, yes, that's called your metabolism is waking up and ready to go. Like,
Yeah,
you need
like,
to get
we're
food in your
human.
body. Yeah. So I don't know if you've run into that one, but many a time I've tried to get people to eat in the morning. That's the number one complaint. Yeah, and I mean, definitely echoing all the things you said. I mean, underfueling is obviously such a big conversation. It ties into the whole REDS conversation. But we're not going to go there today. But we talked about immunity and gut health, and I think that's such a big one because underfueling, especially chronically, really can reduce immunity, and specifically with cortisol. And I won't go into the mechanical pathways of that. So we don't need to do that, but it can lead to more frequent illness, which means missed training. So like for some people, they're just so like tunnel vision on their training, and they're just like, whatever. Like, we don't want you to miss your workouts and miss your fun, really. So like, if that's the thing you're worried about, of course, no one loves being sick. So, thinking about that, like if you're getting sick all the time, like, hey, that's not normal. Like something is off. And then the gut health piece is really crucial because, and again, all these things are tied together. Chronic stress can reduce like stomach acid, and that can reduce the function of that first line of defense against pathogens. Chronic stress can also have a negative impact on intestinal function, and it can impact nutrient absorption. So that's, of course, really, really important when it comes to, actually absorbing the food that you're eating, because the food really isn't available to be used and technically in the body until it's actually absorbed through the gut into our bloodstream. So, we want to kind of keep these things in mind that, even if you're doing, let's say you are fueling adequately, but your stress is like out of control, like that is causing all kinds of problems, and you might not be in a good place nutritionally speaking as a result. So there are just lots and lots of things going on that are swirling around in the context of this discussion. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that one out there. Anything else in the underfueling conversation you want to touch on before we move on?
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking on like the gut and immunity with underfueling is a lot of the times, and I'm sure you see this too, with underfueling, it can actually increase symptoms of like GI issues during runs, even throughout the day, which, just as you talked about, it's like we have reduced stomach acid, so our body's not quite breaking down the food as well. And then that decreases our body's actually ability to absorb the nutrients. And so we can see things like micronutrient deficiencies arise from this. We see obviously GI issues, not only, like I said, out on like runs or training sessions, but also all day long. It might be that you get super bloated and uncomfortable after meals. Some bloating, I do want to remind everyone, is normal after meals.
Yes.
Those are your enzymes working and digesting the food. That's normal. But excessive painful bloating, not normal. Having to use the restroom right after a meal, also not normal. That bowel urgency is not normal. So those are some things to maybe just be cognizant of. And like, if those things are happening, a really great way to combat that is before you sit down for a meal, just sitting for a second and taking like a deep belly breath. So really expanding your belly. This allows what's called your vagus nerve, which is a nerve that runs from your brain through your diaphragm into your stomach. So we're expanding that diaphragm. It's signaling to this vagus nerve like, hey, everything's okay. We can chill out. It's time to rest and digest, which is the opposite of that fight or flight response.
Yep.
And this can actually really help calm the system down so you're appropriately digesting food. Easier said than done when you have a lot going on in your life, but it really seriously takes 1 to 2 minutes to take those deep belly breaths and just like calm down for a second, and you will notice a difference. Like it makes a huge difference. And I'm speaking from professional and personal experience here. So
yeah, I do need to try that. And you know, I think I'm always a realist. Like, no one's asking you to like sit and stare at a wall and I mean, yes, we want to chew our food and all that stuff, but like also like real life, like many of us, myself included, working lunch, all that stuff. But you can still take a minute or two, as you said, to just take those deep breaths and chill for a minute and, you know, slow down and do your work and whatever else is going on. Hopefully you're not like racing around the city or doing whatever while you're eating, but you know, we're all doing our best here. But yeah, I love that. That's super important for sure. Hey everyone, just a really quick break for a few announcements. First, my on-demand course library on Teachable is up and running, and I have many different resources on there for you to check out. As I mentioned earlier in the show, my new course, Peak Performance for Endurance Athletes, is finally available for purchase. It's on Teachable, and you can find it there. If you don't need or want a full course, I'm also selling several of the downloads from the course separately, essentially mini ebooks on a variety of topics, and you can get each one for just $5 to $10, or I also have a discounted bundle available. And lastly, if you've been thinking about reaching out for one-to-one nutrition coaching, I do have openings remaining for later in March and as well as in early April. You can fill out a new client inquiry form and schedule a free 10-minute call on my website if you're interested. You can find actually all those links on my website, on the link in my bio, or of course in the show notes. All right, let's get back to our show. Let's talk about coffee and other stimulants and how it relates to cortisol. What do you want to share with that?
Yeah, so coffee, and I want to remind people, I am a coffee lover. I'm a coffee drinker. Yeah, all of the things. I love caffeine. Yeah. I think it's a great, it's a really well-researched, stimulant right out there in the endurance space, and I think it can be used appropriately. But the biggest thing I think I want to touch on here is a lot of what I see in athletes, especially that, hit their 4 or 5 a.m. sessions, is like feet hit the floor, coffee pots on, they're drinking coffee, they're in their session. There's no food. There's no hydration or food in that time. And coffee is not energy. Okay. So coffee does not equal energy. It might give you this false energy of like, that stimulant that we're feeling, but it's literally giving you no calories unless maybe you're adding some cream to it or something. So that's one. But also, as you touched on earlier, we have what's called that cortisol awakening response. And in the first 30 minutes, we see this really drastic increase, which is what makes us awake and ready to go for the day. But if we are interrupting that with caffeine and allowing this cortisol to peak even higher because of that caffeine introduction, we are maybe like setting that natural rise and fall off a little bit. So what I encourage people to do is limit or avoid caffeine within that first hour of waking, at least. 2 hours is really optimal to allow that cortisol to fall naturally, and then have coffee. So hydrate first, water first before coffee in the morning, and just like be curious here. You know, what happens to your body? Do you actually need that caffeine to wake up? If your answer is yes, we need to reevaluate what else is going on in the day and how you're sleeping and all of that. But most often, you don't actually need the caffeine to do the things that you're wanting to do. It's more of maybe a like normative that you're just like, okay, let's do this. Like I'm gonna turn on the coffee pot and get ready to go, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the way I talk about coffee, because I've read like conflicting things on delaying it and how much or whatever. But I definitely encourage people to at least have some food, like have a balanced meal or snack, or if you're about to work out, maybe it's just carb based, but have something food oriented. Don't just sit there and drink coffee on an empty stomach and then eat like 2 hours later. And as you were saying, like, fueling that workout. So again, not just coffee, like if you're having like a cup of coffee, like a literal cup, like, yes, that counts as hydration, but like, let's get some other things going in there too, ideally.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it is like, well, what does your coffee or caffeine consumption look like the rest of the day? Because when in the cortisol conversation, we're talking about sleep a lot of the time too, right? Sleep patterns and, because like the types of questions we might ask, are you falling asleep easily? Are you waking up and is it hard to get back to sleep? Are you waking up early? Like there are lots of questions we might ask surrounding sleep. And we also want to check into, okay, well, what's your caffeine consumption like? Are you having caffeine in the afternoon? Like how many cups of coffee are you having per day? Are you having coffee instead of eating? Like there are lots of, as you said, coffee isn't energy. So I think coffees or any form of caffeine is a good kind of place to just be, do a little detective work and kind of look into the habits there. It could simply be a habit, that maybe you can pull back on. If anyone, and then another thing, like if you're already dealing with anxiety and other forms of stress, coffee is not your friend. Not something you want to be increasing. Like if you're having like a cup or so, like fine, but like, you want to pull back on that a bit. So, we don't need to go deep down the hole of caffeine, but I wanted to at least mention it because it obviously plays a role in the whole cortisol conversation.
Yes.
So, okay, the next thing I want to talk about, which comes up a lot, and I'm sure it does for you as well, is relating to weight and specifically body fat, right? So, for instance, someone's trying to lose weight, but they can't, or maybe they even notice that they gain body fat while they think they're doing all the right things. They're exercising a ton, they're eating clean, like all that kind of stuff, right? We know that chronic underfueling slows down metabolism. It can cause an increase in body fat. So why is cortisol roped into all of this, into this whole conversation? What do you want to say about this?
Yeah, so cortisol specifically can increase what's called our visceral fat, which is the fat that's right surrounding our vital organs. Some people also know this as like the dangerous fat, right? Because it's sitting right on top of all of those vital organs. And it does this by actually mobilizing triglycerides from storage and relocating them into visceral fat. And so, yes, we might see an increase in body fat because of this, but it kind of also goes back to how your body's response is to underfueling and increasing blood sugar and that whole response. It's like this chronic cycle that's happening here. And so blood glucose is high. It's basically now suppressing all of those appetite cues. And so now we're not eating. And then we see all of this triglycerides being mobilized, visceral fat being stored. Visceral fat also has increase or more cortisol receptor sites, which obviously is an issue, right? So that means that appetite and cravings here for those energy dense foods basically come from the hypothalamus, and we get this whole cycle again of like you're under fueling all day, something I often see, and then it's like we get home late at night, all of these cues for like essentially those like feel good hormones to be released. We're craving really energy dense foods. Typically it's high fat, high carb. That's typically what's being craved. And then we get this like release of that serotonin, dopamine from the brain. So yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it's like, I mean, I have several clients right now where it's like we're just like they're complaining like they're binging, or they're, you know, they feel out of control surrounding foods or thinking about foods all the time. They can't lose weight. They're frustrated. And I work on weight loss sometimes. I don't know what you do in your practice. It's not something I work on too frequently, but with particular clients, I'll go there a little bit. But you know, we always start with, okay, well, let's see where you're at and make sure that you're eating adequately and you're in a good place. Like, we're never being like, great, we're going to focus on weight loss. That's never where we start. But by simply like feeding themselves adequately, it's like that stuff just calmed the F down. You know, it's like suddenly it's like food's not a big deal and you can have these things around. It's who cares? I mean, it's kind of nuts how quickly it happens too. So yeah, I mean, I think this is part of the reason why often cortisol gets this like bad reputation. It's just like, oh, cortisol and body weight and all this stuff. But again, I mean, our body's just trying to protect itself, you know? So these are all protective measures. Your body, like it really is amazing what the human body can do to try to like just survive and all of that. So when you think about what you're doing to yourself and what you're asking it to do day after day, that explains what's happening.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Awesome. Anything else on this before we move on that you want to point out?
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you mentioned around like just honestly supporting your body all day long, and then all of a sudden these like nighttime binge sessions and cravings go away. It's, you know, it goes to show that when we provide our body what it's asking for, that cortisol production gets decreased significantly, and we're able to actually like think clearly around our nutrition habits and other factors in the day, right? We're actually able to like think clearly and make those decisions appropriately based on our goals or based on, you know, our training session or whatever the case may be. And it really comes full circle. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of success stories of honestly where I've increased calories for an athlete. And I don't work with counting calories or macros or anything like that.
Me neither.
I just do it on the back end of like, how can we add value to what you're doing? Like, let's support your body a little more here. And they've changed body composition significantly. They're like, oh my gosh, my clothes are fitting better. I have more energy. Like all of these things come full circle. And so while I don't focus on weight loss specifically, it's all of those like biofeedback scale of like energy levels improving and digestion improving and all of these things again coming full circle. And a lot of that biofeedback actually shows that they have lost body fat, right? Because there's so many other things, for lack of a better word, that we could dive into with that, but that's kind of the scope.
And I think the other thing to note there is that all of this takes time. You know, I think especially like even when like I take someone, we're not working on weight loss and often there's a mindset piece where, so it isn't just the food, like we're working on mindset, we're working on multiple things, right? Like, so we're not certainly saying like, hey, just eat more and you're going to feel better and blah, 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 boom, you know, like that's not obviously, we're oversimplifying here, but you know, it takes time to change behaviors. Like some things are fast, but other things, you know, like the way that your body is just adjusting, especially if you've been like depriving it for a really long time and overworking it for a really long time, you know, you can't just expect to snap your fingers and be good to go. Like it takes time to recover from a nutrient deficiency. It takes time to build new like lifestyle habits and how you deal with stress and to get into a better sleep pattern. I mean, it just takes time. All these things take time. So, just a gentle reminder to everybody that, because everyone wants to see results quickly. And even with something like body composition, because everyone's like, oh, well, if I just do all these things, I'll see my body comp change. And it's like, well, that too will take time. This is not an immediate thing. And I think a lot of people will like step on their scale, it has the little fancy scale with all the body fat numbers like that, from like 2 weeks, well, nothing's happened, So just try to be patient, and recognize that, just give your body a little break. It's working hard. You need to give it time to adjust to these changes. So now let's move on to testing. So I think a lot of people, I'm sure there are questions you might ask your clients to kind of, get a sense of maybe there's something off. And of course, just hearing about sleep habits and hygiene and how they eat and everything, you kind of just suspect certain things. But let's say actually the first question is, do you even test cortisol in your athletes? And if so, what are you doing?
Yeah. So kind of what you touch on, it depends. Like if they're reporting, and I'm seeing just a bunch of red flags come up, I'm like, hey, let's just see what's going on here. So I use Dutch testing, and that's it's a salivary sample, and they do 5 different tests throughout the day. So we talked about like that 30-minute rise right when you wake up. So they do basically right when they wake up, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and then they're doing an afternoon and then an evening, typically right before they go to bed. And so typically we'll see this drastic peak in the morning, in a normal functioning human, drastic peak, and then it that 30, 60 minutes, and then it gradually falls throughout the day and tapers off right before we go to bed. And we see our lowest cortisol anywhere from 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, and then it peaks again, and typically that peak is around 8 a.m. And this is obviously very general. Everyone's circadian rhythm is a little bit different, and, so on and so forth, but that's typically what we see. And so that's what I'll test. And then, I've seen many different results with this, and some you might see a high cortisol all day long. Some I've seen what's called like a flatline cortisol, where it's like there's no peak in the morning, and they are feeling, the best way to describe it is like this brain fog in the morning. They just feel flat all day long, no energy, no appetite, no like drive to do life, is the best way to describe it. I have not seen an inverted one, but that does exist, where cortisol actually dips in the morning, and then peaks at random points throughout the day. And then I've also seen where people have this random peak at night, and you might feel this, like, the best way to describe it is like tired but wired right before you go to bed. Like you feel like your body is like, oh my gosh, I want to sleep, but your brain is like, just going.
That's me. That's me after every race. I don't know about you, but I cannot sleep after a race.
That's so common for people. I'm like, I am a very good sleeper. So I don't have that issue. But I have so many people that experience that. But I think it's like, just like the amp of the race, and just, Yeah.
So are you generally ignoring any blood test cortisol value, especially if it's not in the morning?
Yeah, because kind of what you touched on earlier, like cortisol can peak like 2 hours after, like for about 2 hours after like an event. So it's not super accurate.
Or meaningful. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I've learned a great deal about the Dutch test and lots of continuing ed, and I haven't yet brought it into my practice. I do the GI map, but not the Dutch test yet. But I've been planning to do it on myself because I'm very curious, and I know a lot of dietitians like the test. So I will have to see, because I am very curious what my cortisol levels. I'm kind of curious / terrified of what my cortisol levels are.
Yeah,
We'll see.
who
I think
knows? You
they're
might
better than they
surprise
used to be.
yourself.
Yeah, that's true. I sleep great. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Um, I think I asked all my testing questions. I think we covered that pretty well. So yeah, let's wrap things up with treatment. So let's
Hmm.
say you see that cortisol is high or low, or whatever pattern you're seeing on a test.
Hmm.
Or maybe maybe you don't even have a test and you're kind of just sensing something's off. How are you approaching treatment? Of course, acknowledging that every single person's different. So I know this is kind of a hard question to generalize, but I would say like we can target like areas of sleep training, stressors, diet, and I don't know, whatever else you want to throw in there.
Hmm.
So maybe we can start with diet. And I don't know if you use supplements or how you work that into your practice, but yeah, lay out kind of how you're typically approaching treatment from kind of a generalized, broader view.
Yeah. So, um, biggest thing is like adequate total calorie intake all day long, and
Mm-hmm.
that meal spacing that we talked about earlier, making sure that you're
Mm-hmm.
not like stockpiling calories and what like bookending your day with these huge meals. Like, let's be consistent all day long. Hydration, which I think is a very underrated aspect of nutrition. We really like hydration is key, and when we're dehydrated, it actually stresses our body out. It increases blood pressure. We're not transporting nutrients to and from your cells or getting rid of toxins, and so we want to be cognizant of hydration and not just plain water, but also electrolytes, especially as athletes. Like we are sweating, and we need to replace those. So whether you get electrolytes from fruits, veggies, being liberal with the salt shaker, or you're intentionally adding electrolytes to your fluids, totally like either one is fair game, but get them in. And then also optimal levels of essential fatty acids. I think I see this missed a lot in athletes. We talk a lot about carbs, and carbs are super important, right?
Yeah.
But so are our essential fats. Like they are essential because our bodies can't make them, so we need to be intaking those. Your all of your omegas, super important to get in, and then having this balance of them. So omega 3, omega 6, we actually need both of them. I think omega 6s have been put in a really bad light, but we do need to intake
Yeah.
those too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
um, Making sure your B vitamins are included in your diet, and you might even check the status of these. Like if you're really having an increased stress response in your body, it's just important to remember when we are highly stressed, our body is going through our minerals and our vitamins much faster at a faster rate. Our body's using those things. And so, um, in these times of high stress, whether, you know, it's a high training volume or life is just busy, it's important to monitor your health and, get your labs done. Have those evaluated by, physician, dietitian, what have you. And then another factor of nutrition that I will say is there's well researched adaptogens out there, for mitigating that stress response in the body. I think a really popular one, and most have heard of this now, is ashwagandha. It's a very well researched adaptogen and can be super productive for mitigating that stress response, like I said. With adaptogens, we always want to take the lowest effective dose, which is 250 milligrams per day, and just see how your body responds to that. You can always titrate up as needed, but 250 milligrams is appropriate for mitigating that stress response. Um, and then, yeah, those are the ones that I have on nutrition. Outside of nutrition, I always recommend building out what I call a stress management toolbox. So understand all the different stressors like we've talked about today and different strategies to cope with those. So, think about your controllable factors in each scenario. understand what the different scenarios bring to you, right? Exercise, when appropriately fueled and appropriate rest and recovery is taken, that is a very productive stress. We need that to get stronger and faster and etc. As an athlete. Life stressors, understand who your support group is and who you have to lean on. And, I think that ties into like work, family life too, is like, what avenues can you have as a support? Do you need to talk to a therapist? Like, do you feel like you need that third party opinion and ability to really be vulnerable in a different way with a different human? Sometimes it's helpful to talk to somebody outside of your immediate group. And then sleep, of course.
Yeah.
Save the best for last. There literally is no better way for your body to recover and fully recover than sleep. And this is when all of those hormones come back to a homeostasis, when your glycogen storage recovers, like a lot of good stuff happens when you sleep. So, 7 to 9 hours is what the Sleep Foundation recommends, and there's really phenomenal research on it. So just like make it a non-negotiable. And kind of what you mentioned, Claire, earlier, like if it is interrupted sleep, we are all at different seasons of life and we're doing literally the best we can. So sometimes that happens, and there's great research out there to support naps being productive for regenerating as well, especially like cognitive function. So if that's realistic in your life, take advantage of that. 20 minutes is really all you need for that too. So
yeah, absolutely. Are you ever recommending supplements to help with sleep, whether that's melatonin or magnesium or or maybe not necessarily with sleep, but general relaxation or just anything else?
Yeah, I try to stay away from melatonin just because the dosing of melatonin is so high in so many supplements.
Yeah, totally.
And we truly don't need that much. Like our body produces like 0.5 milligrams for us to wind down, and there's supplements I've seen up to 10.
10,
like,
I know.
Smokes.
It's crazy. Like, that's why I wanted to cover it.
I would be knocked out for like till tomorrow, there's no way. So not melatonin. I know tart cherry juice has great research in actually helping with the production of melatonin. You need a very small amount, like 4 ounces. And there's so many great recipes out there that like have, tart cherry juice, like little mocktail type things that can be fun to drink at night. So, so typically like something like tart cherry juice, magnesium, if we see, especially in labs, that somebody's magnesium deficient, that is definitely going to affect the quality of sleep. So let's supplement with that.
Awesome. Are we missing anything? Do we not cover anything that you want to add?
I
think we're pretty thorough.
I think we did good.
Yeah, me too. Awesome. So what's on the horizon for you? Are you training for anything? What are you kind of currently doing in your athlete life?
Yeah, so I have Oceanside 70.3 in a month.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. It'll kind of, circling back to cortisol, but I had a really rough start to the year with just coming off of a pretty big season of training, and then I got sick back to back, like.
Oh, sorry.
So I think it was like a total of like 6 weeks of just being out.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And just, just being consistent where I could be. And I feel like I finally have come out of that in the past like week and a half. So it'll be a rust buster, and we'll see what happens. And that's okay.
Awesome. Do you have anything else in your schedule, or is that the main race?
Yeah, I'll have 70.3 St. George in May. And then I'm also going to try a gravel race, which will be brand new for me. So I'm excited to try something new. I think it's always fun to do something new. And then I'll have multi-sport nationals in June. So after that, so
Awesome.
it will be busy beginning of the year or busy
Yeah.
beginning of the season, but yeah, it'll be good.
Nice. Nice. And did I see that you're getting married sometime soon?
I am. Yeah, we kind of like didn't do any celebratory stuff. We've been engaged for a year.
Oh,
But
okay. Well, still, that's exciting.
yeah, and our wedding's in July. So,
Oh,
yeah.
fun. Are you getting married in Colorado?
Yeah, we are. Yep.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, congrats. That's exciting.
Thank
Exciting to kind
you.
of squeeze that in the summer. Wonderful. Yeah, I think I saw
Yeah.
pictures of your bridal shower or something. I was like, oh, you're getting married.
Yeah.
Very fun.
Yes.
Very, very fun. Awesome. Any fun projects or things going on in your business that you'd like to share with my audience?
Yeah, we have a couple of different master classes coming up. So we'll do actually one on relative energy deficiency in sport next week. So that will be, what is that, March 14th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And then in April, end of April, we're gonna have like a 3-week kind of master class that's gonna be on fueling your A race. So really taking apart race day nutrition, hydration, and sweat testing, and making sure that you're supported in whatever your race you're doing. Um, yeah, those are the main things. We have some stuff coming out in the fall, but that's, I feel like, down the line. So
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go through my quick bites questions and I'll send you on your way. What is your
Okay.
favorite pre-workout meal or snack?
Ooh, toast, peanut butter, banana is always like a go-to for me.
Totally. Same with
Yeah.
me.
Yep.
What about afterwards?
Um, it kind of changes based on season. So summertime, I love to do like a really packed protein smoothie. Just like hydration and nutrition in one go. Um,
Hmm.
winter, I make like a pretty dense oatmeal. So it's like oats and egg whites and protein powder, and then I top it with either banana or berries and some nuts, and um, yeah, get all the nutrition in.
Nice. Nice
So
and warm after you're out there in the cold, I guess, right?
yes, 100%.
Biggest cooking catastrophe if you've had one.
Oh man, I'm sure I have. Um, actually, yeah, most recently. Well, one, cooking at altitude is hard, or baking
Yes.
specifically at altitude
Yeah.
is hard, and and gluten-free baking is very hard. And I was hosting a get together and was making
Hmm.
gluten-free brownies, and
Uh,
they it was so bad. They like completely sunk in the middle, and then I
oh
was
God.
making like these little like kind of mini bite type things, but they completely sunk in the middle. And so I was like, well, maybe they need to cook longer. So I put them back in, and then I took them out, and they were like hockey pucks. And I was like, all right, well, fail. That's okay. So
Where are you from originally? Or are you from Colorado or no?
I'm from California, actually.
Oh,
So
nice. What
yeah,
part?
the city of Orange. It's like it's in Orange County, but yeah, city of Orange.
Got it.
So
Okay,
yeah,
awesome. How do you like your eggs cooked if you eat eggs?
over medium.
What is your favorite beverage?
Ooh, I'm like a sparkling water fiend, so anything bubbly.
What are your comfort foods?
Chocolate and peanut butter,
What
anything.
is your favorite ice cream flavor or dessert? I've learned now to say dessert, not just ice cream, because not everybody eats ice cream apparently.
Oh my gosh.
Mostly
I love
bleed ice
ice
cream, but
cream.
yes.
Well, I am gonna say actually brownies and ice cream. And I actually do, most people do like brownie with like vanilla bean. I am all chocolate, so brownie with
Ooh.
chocolate ice cream.
That reminds me, I used to get this amazing sundae when I was a kid at this like summer camp, and it would be like a massive brownie with yeah, ice cream and whipped cream and chocolate sauce, and it was just next. Now I want one. This is yeah, I have to
Yeah,
get one of these now.
me too.
I don't know anywhere that does that though, so I might have to make it myself. Okay, and last question: top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
Ooh. Nutrition based or just anything?
Whatever you want. Whatever you want. However you want to interpret that.
Yeah.
Most people go
Top
for sporting stuff, but up to you.
Yeah. Well, probably a good pair of trail shoes and road shoes because I like to like alternate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then a new bathing suit because we have outdoor pools here. So that'll be, yeah, a new like lap pool bathing suit because I have like a variety. So
Nice.
yeah,
Awesome. Well, thanks
yeah.
so much, Dana. This is so fun. Where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, so a dash of Dana RDN is my Instagram. That's probably the best way to connect with me. So always happy to have conversations there or connect in any other way. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for tackling cortisol with me. This was a fun topic I think everyone's going to find useful.
Yes, I think so too.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Thanks so much. You too.
So that's our show for today. I hope you all enjoyed the talk on cortisol. And if you did, please be sure you are following my show or subscribing it wherever you listen. And if you have a minute, please rate and review the show to help others find it. If you're able to throw me a few bucks, I do have a Patreon page to help support the show. I'd love to see you over there. Patreon members get some great perks, including free merchandise, huge discounts on my digital downloads, and much more. Thank you so much for your support. And of course, you can always reach out, Claire@eatforendurance.com, with any feedback, questions, or topic requests. All right, see you guys next time.